I don't think we can start a video like this any other way than by taking a moment to appreciate this beautiful stack of books behind me. I mean, look how sexy they look. I read a lot of books. This year I have a goal to read 100 books. Last year I read 75-ish books. So you can imagine that I lose track of plot lines or in nonfiction books like lessons all the time. And I feel like if I had a spot to write down some point form notes, some favorite quotes, some ratings, all of that fun stuff, it would just be a really good reference for whenever I want to go back to a book. I've never made something like this before, but I think it'll be a fun one, so let's get into it. Before we begin, hit subscribe so you don't miss future videos where I show myself creating journal spreads, talking about books I'm reading, vlogging my life in Toronto, and more. This Traveler's Dotted Journal from Archer & Olive is going to be the home to my new reading journal. I love the color so much and I think it's a great size for jotting down quick notes. So please give a warm welcome to Clary. I feel like it's only appropriate to name a reading journal after a beloved character, so you might recognize Clary from the Shadowhunter series by Cassandra Clare, which was one of the first series that really got me into reading, so it just felt like a fitting name. Speaking of Cassandra Clare, I actually used the first page in this journal as an opportunity to set the tone with one of my favorite quotes from the Infernal Devices series. I started off by pasting in a piece of craft paper, which you all know is a journaling go-to for me as of late. The craft paper I used will be linked in the description box below with links to everything else I used in today's video. And then I used a micron to write in the quote that says, "One must always be careful of books and what is inside them, for words have the power to change us." When writing in big quotes, I think it's really fun to play around with changing fonts, and a simple combo that I love to use often is capital letters and cursive, and I think the added washi tapes I pasted in also really helped bring this spread together. The first official spread in this journal is a spot for me to keep track of the books that I read. To create it, I started off by making a basic table with columns for writing in a book's title, what I rated it out of 5, when I started it, and when I finished it. I also keep this information updated on my Goodreads page all the time, so if you ever want to check in on what I'm reading, that's the best place to get current updates. A link can be found below. This table would have been more than fine on its own, but I have a hard time saying no to a quality drop shadow. I find drop shadows such an easy way to elevate an otherwise pretty simple layout, and I think it did the job here as well. I probably should have made this a 2-page spread because of my high reading goal for the year, but if I need to extend my list, I'll just insert it later on in the journal, and I think it'll make it easier for me to find my reading notes because this journal does not have numbered pages. For these next 2 pages, you're currently seeing me paste in what I can only describe as glob cutouts of this beautiful paper I have in my collection that has a ton of text all over it. It's a print that I think is especially appropriate to include in a reading focus spread like this one, if I do say so myself. I also used my Cameo Silhouette 4 cutting machine to cut out my own handwriting of the spread title onto craft paper, and these pages, as you can see, are a spot for recording all of my to-be-read books. There's a separate page for fiction books and nonfiction books, and for every book that I add to these lists, I'll mark the left column with either diagonal lines if it's a book I need to buy, a solid square if it's a book I already own, and then once I read a book, I can give it a white check mark to indicate that it has been read, and it no longer requires to be read classification. On this next spread, I started off by gluing in 2 ripped pieces of grid paper that I took from another journal that I own. One piece for the top left page and another for the bottom right. Since the graph paper has a bit more of yellow undertones, I also felt like this was the perfect opportunity to add in some basic masking tape and pair it with the same star washi tape that you saw me add to the quote page at the start of this video. My intention for these 2 pages was to create a space to record reading highlights. So on the left page, I started off by making a basic rectangle table. This page is going to be a spot for recording quotes that really stand out to me, whether it be a quote that I think is just really beautiful or one that has a satisfying quote unquote mic drop moment. And that skinny column on the right is a spot for me to write down which book or author the quote comes from, and I can write it vertically rather than horizontally. The page on the right also started off with a rectangle with 2 columns, and this one is meant for recording down beautiful words that I come across while reading and their definition. And I've touched on this before on my channel, but the reader in me has such a deep admiration for the English language, and oftentimes I come across words while reading that either aren't super common or sound really fancy. So I figured it'd be fun to create a spot in my journal for keeping track of any gems I stumble upon. Words like serendipity, quintessential, ethereal, oblivion. I'd love to hear your favorite word in the comments below, but words like that just get me all hard-eyed. Up next is my reading routine spread, and I'm basically for this page just highlighting the times I most often read and some of the things I do to make my reading sessions more enjoyable. This is definitely one of those spreads that can seem super fluffy, but I think a version of myself years down the line will find this page a neat one to stumble upon. I personally start and end my day with the book, so I drew in a basic sunrise doodle and crescent moon doodle, and I love how much character they both add to this page while still being really simple. And beside each doodle, I recorded the general times I spend reading, depending on whether or not a book I'm reading is really pulling me in. I also have longer reading sessions during the weekend, but this is the basic pattern. And if you're interested in me sharing an updated reading routine video that goes over all of this and things like how I annotate the books I read, let me know in the comment section down below. On the right page, you're seeing me paste in a piece of craft paper because I wanted to do some writing with my Jelly Roll pen, and I find craft paper to be such a stunning backdrop for white pen writing. I also brought back that star washi tape and grid paper to help connect all of the spreads together. That's something I really pay attention to when I'm creating spreads for a specific month or purpose. I like to add those small touches that tie everything together because I think it makes a collection of spreads look really well thought out. This page is going to be the home to a quarterly review spread where I'm able to reflect on the last few months of reading and identify out of the books I had read during that period, which book was my favorite, which was my least favorite, how many books I was able to read, the best whoa quote that I came across, and a mini list of books I want to make a priority for the next quarter. I think if you have any sort of goal, it's always great to have reviews throughout the year to kind of keep you on track, and reading goals are no exception. I think this is a really great way to kind of keep you accountable if that is something that's important to you. Not everyone has serious reading goals, which is fine. You can be more leisurely, but if you do have a reading goal this year, this might be a great option for you. This next spread is really what's going to be representative of what this entire journal will look like because it's going to be filled with reading notes, and this is my reading notes template. Since this is a spread that I'll be using for each book that I read, I made sure not to do pasting in of scrap paper or washi tape because realistically, I will not be able to be bothered with that when I'm in the reading groove. There's a spot to record the title of the book, the author's name, a rating out of 5 once I complete it, a section for writing down your mini reading goal by setting a pages per day benchmark. Definitely a more relevant thing for nonfiction books. I can typically speed through a fiction book, but nonfiction books aren't as easy to binge, nor do I think you get the most value out of them when you do that. So this kind of gives me a guideline to try to stick to keep the progress going. The rest of the page will look very different depending on the book that I'm reading. For nonfiction books, I will probably create a table for jotting down quick recaps after each chapter, a section for pages to revisit, and any key takeaways. For certain fiction books like fantasy novels where there are tons of characters and world building, I'll have a section for tracking information about those things, as well as a general plot line section so that I can have a refresher when the next installment in the series comes out. For some books, I might just keep this section entirely blank and record any notes I think are relevant. And as you're seeing me draw out here, I may also decide to structure my notes a bit with columns to keep track of the chapter or page number next to each note and my final thoughts at the end. Basically, aside from the top quarter of the left page, I think this section will constantly be fluctuating. And as I do this more, I'm sure I'll find a specific layout or two that might just stand out. I don't plan on writing notes for every single book I read because there are some fluffy fiction books that I read that I don't think I'll ever have a need to go back and brush up on details over, but this will come in handy for fiction series and nonfiction reading, so I'm really looking forward to filling it in. What were your thoughts on these reading journal spreads? Would you ever consider making a reading journal for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, hit subscribe and the notification bell if you haven't already, and I will see you all very soon with a new video.
Y no escuché lo que dicen, pa' mí eres bella. Eres perfecta por fuera, ya, y más perfecta por dentro, ya. Y no escuché lo que